Welcome to the 200th episode of the Adam Rothstein Hockey Podcast. I have a very special one for you today. That's Gary Chupik. He is an elite um, mindset coach. He has worked with professional athletes, and in this episode, we will be talking with him uh, about developing that mindset for on and off the ice. We'll get into baseball, basketball, other sports as well, and how this all can also relate to some business as well. If you would like, I have his links in the show notes, so please be sure to check that out. His Instagram is Elite Mindset, and his website is elitemindsetnation.com. And with that being said, let's get to this episode. Welcome to the Adam Rothstein Hockey Podcast. This is your podcast for all things hockey. On this podcast, we talk about past history to the modern day and what you can do to grow the sport. I am your host, Adam Rothstein. All right, let's get to the show. And welcome back to the Adam Rothstein Hockey Podcast. With me today is Gary Chupik. Gary, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
All right, so tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a mental performance coach. I unlock teams and athletes and business people, but primarily professional athletes and teams, and I unlock their potential.
Nice, nice. So, what teams have you worked with so far?
I'm not allowed to say because I'm under contract with some of those teams, and so I can't say that, but I do work with multiple professional teams in multiple sports.
Okay. But I can say that you've worked with the MLB, NBA, NHL,
I have.
Big Four, and well, I guess it would be the Big Five too. MLS does count as well
Yeah,
as
the only
part
one
of.
I haven't worked with that you mentioned is basketball. That's hasn't been an area that's taken off for me, but football and hockey are my two big sports.
Nice, nice. So when you're working with an athlete, momentum is a key factor when they're playing the game. One bad call or not made or a penalty that's not called could change the entire shift of the game. And let's say I'm playing, and in beer league hockey, when there's contact to the head, which I've had a little bit of recently. Um, if that's not cold, I mean, it just gets to you. And then you're not set. So, and you might, lose focus. So, how do you keep players on track with their goals to make sure that they are succeeding both on and off the field or ice?
Yeah, well, so let's tackle sports for example. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can swing momentum in a game, but what's really interesting to me is there's been some research done on momentum in sports, and what I find incredibly interesting is that there's a science behind it. And basically, the research shows that the way to change momentum in a game is to do something positive. And so sometimes it will come from a negative event or circumstance. Like for example, I remember watching Nathan Horton play against the Canucks in 2012, 2013. He got, sort of it was a dirty hit and he was laid out, he was unconscious, and it just swung the momentum of a series. And I think there are negative events that can happen that can swing momentum, but most of the time it is something positive that happens. And this is what the research shows is that when someone makes a play that you don't expect, So whether it's the play itself or the particular player. So let's say you're expecting your Connor McDavid or your Alex Ovechkin to make the play. Well, people kind of expect that a little bit, but what really is amazing is when someone that you don't expect makes a play. And then momentum can swing on that. So it's really interesting how just about anybody on a team can swing momentum. And I think that momentum is actually quite interesting because in real life, if you think about it, the normal events that happen throughout a day are kind of like they're the part of the rhythm, they're part of the pattern. But in order to sort of change momentum in your life, you kind of have to make a play, which is an action step. So you interrupt the pattern. So you do a pattern interrupt that people don't expect, or you might not even expect yourself to do. And that's one way that you can intentionally create momentum or change momentum in your life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember in 2003, I was a little boy back then, and we still had this antenna TV. It was good. I remember Channel 25, and it was the Red Sox and the Yankees, and this weirdo by the name of Aaron Boone steps up. I don't know if it was Joe Torre who told him to, hey, just get a single, just get on base, get a rally going. It was a tie game, and then he just sent it to deep left and he sent them to the World Series. And sometimes it's those moments that really do change the makeup of everything and how things can go.
Well, isn't it fascinating how when you have momentum, everything is easier? Like you don't have to try as hard. It's very interesting. It's like flapping your wings into the wind versus just sort of floating on it. And when we have momentum in a particular area of our life, things just seem a little bit easier for some reason. And it's pretty fascinating. So I think the trick is not to try harder, it's to just try and make a play and let the momentum of, let's say, gravity do its work.
Of course. So you can't tell me about your clients directly, but what is the first thing you say to a new client or team when you're getting to know them and you're getting to understand them?
Yeah, that's a good question because sometimes I get called in to help a player who's really struggling. And so I end up having to do a little bit of a deep dive into trying to find out what is at the source of it. So is it an emotional issue? Is it a performance issue? Is it a pre-performance issue? Is it a psychological issue? So what is the source of the issue that that player is experiencing? So that's really one of the very first things I do when it comes to working with an individual athlete. And then, of course, with teams, it's all over the place. For example, some teams are in the slump and they need to change momentum. And so when they have to change momentum, that's when I'll introduce some type of a pattern interrupt to get them outside of that cyclical loop sort of oriented thinking. And there are other teams I work with that are doing perfectly fine. Like they're doing great and they just want to get better. And I remember one of the things that Pete Carroll told me was the best always want to get better. And so they're looking for that cutting edge. They're always looking for that competitive edge to beat their opponents. And so I think it just kind of depends what a team wants. Are they in a slump or are they just wanting to get better?
Muted there. Exactly. Um, but but during the Stanley Cup Finals, I noticed that the Panthers were just on McDavid. Like they just like he was not getting to the middle of the ice to where he could have just undressed Sergey. But I think that but what would you say to him if let's say it's after game three and you see the Oilers are struggling, what would you say if you were in the Oilers locker room and what would you say to them or help guide them or what would you do to guide them to get them to, that Stanley Cup victory?
Yeah, that is a fascinating question because the Panthers defense is so smothering. And I think they play a 1-3-1. I mean, it's just so hard to move through the neutral zone with them. And so they just suffocate you. And it's hard to get any momentum. And so Connor is one of his secret weapons is his speed and him continuing to move his feet. So if I had the opportunity or the privilege to work with the Oilers at that point, I would be like, make sure that you're moving your feet. Like one of your strengths is your speed. And so you just got to tap into that because Florida has a way of just slowing down teams and just suffocating them. And, in all fairness to Connor, if you look at the last actually the last three opponents that Florida was facing, and you look at the star players on the other teams, like Matthews, there was like in the last three series, the top scorer on the opposing team had 3 goals combined. So it's just like they just smother. And of course, what Florida does is just they say to themselves, if they can take out the top scorer on the opposing team, then that other team doesn't have a shot. And so they just smother. So someone like Connor McDavid, who obviously is incredibly frustrated with the style of play and the lack of room that he has to operate. Yeah, it's just move your feet and continually uh, create opportunities through your legs.
Absolutely. And I mean, and it's easy to say, hard to do, but but that's what he needs to do. And I do think he will eventually get to a Stanley Cup final, even if he has to move south of the border. He's going to want that. He's going to do whatever it takes. Even if he has to pull a Raymond Bork, he's going to do it.
Well, I'm a Bruins fan, lifelong Bruins fan, so I know Ray, and a lot of people look down on Ray for what he did, but I just appreciate the fact that he took the chance to go get a cup somewhere. And I think about Brad Marchand doing the same thing. Brand is quite the he's quite the joker on his Instagram feed as well, so he's having a lot of fun with it. But it's hard to blame athletes who want to go win that cup. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. I mean, you have this fantasy since you were a child to hoist the cup. And so I don't really blame them for wanting to chase that. And then they can get paid doing it. So Brad just got a new contract and good for him. Like I don't begrudge him at all. Players should get whatever they can. But playing at 43, by the end of his contract, he'll be 43. I don't know. That's a pretty big stretch.
Big stretch indeed. And if anyone wants to work hard to get to the championship, and even if they have an opportunity to go play for a certain team and win that championship of whatever sport that is, they should take it. And I don't blame, and I'm even if this was Alex Ovechkin and he never won a Stanley Cup and he, let's say, goes to the Rangers or something like that, and they have an opportunity to win the cup, I wouldn't blame him at all because you only get this one life, and if you don't, and if and I mean, like, I didn't make it out of D1 club hockey. Um, if you don't take that opportunity, you will regret it. You at least have the chance, at least make an attempt, sort of thing.
Yeah, agreed. And I think a lot of the polish comes off the cup when players like Bork, oftentimes they're perceived to sort of do it in a dishonorable way, like they didn't stick with the team and do it. Just like if Connor McDavid has an opportunity to go to another team and win a cup, I just agree with you. I don't think there's any dishonor in doing that. And hey, listen, I don't care what team you're on, it is hard to win a cup. It is extremely difficult. And I remember, like Tyler Sagan when he was with the Bruins, or you got Brad Marchand who go to the cup in their relatively early part of their career. They just think it's easy. We'll be back here a dozen times. But if you get back once, it's quite an accomplishment.
In baseball, Mike Trout only played in one playoff series, and he only played in three total playoff games, and that was his rookie year. Hasn't been back to the playoffs since. And it was probably hard for Trout to go see Shohei, you know, as soon as he gets into the contract with the Dodgers, it was probably a very hard pill from him going to Anaheim to LA and then winning that World Series in like no time. And with the Yankees barely putting up a fight too. Like he was probably disheartened too. I mean, who wouldn't be? It's like I've been here so long. I was considered the GOAT for so long, and then you go out to LA, you hit 50 for 50, you win the World Series, and and I'm stuck here. I mean, if Mike Trout does have the opportunity, he'll probably go wherever to go win that World Series.
Yeah, and it sort of begs the question, can an athlete feel like they're truly successful if they don't win a championship? I mean, how many players just have just incredible careers but never win a championship?
I think back to Marcel Dion and even Matt Sundin. Marcel Dion um, was
It was
overshadowed by
amazing.
Gretzky. As soon as Gretzky got into the league, the they were tied for the scoring title, and he was out in LA, which was not a traditional market for hockey at the time. It was Lakers, it was Dodgers, and Rams even at the time, but it wasn't, you know, it is a very difficult thing to overcome someone's shadow as well.
Hmm. Yeah, if you think about it, like I lived here in Seattle, got here in the early 90s when Sean Kemp and Gary Payton and Nate McMillan and Detlef Schrempf and Sam Perkins, Big Smooth. I mean, all those guys were amazing. Um, and they were an amazing team. In fact, in most years they would have won an NBA championship, but they ran into this juggernaut called the Chicago Bulls. And so you got to think about like what's the psyche of a Seattle Supersonic like Sean Kemp or Gary Payton, who were completely amazing athletes and had an amazing team, but they just couldn't win that big one against the Chicago Bulls. And so, what is the mindset of someone post career where they didn't win the championship? However, they were really a remarkable team.
I would think that they would be impressed. In college, I actually did win one ring in freshman year, and it's like, well, I think I had the mental fortitude to recognize, okay, I may not be back here ever again, and I was never there again, given injuries, given everything that happened. Um, now, now I do have a question on how you maintain relationships with your clients. You've been working for them or working with them for years. How do you maintain it, and when do you know where to adjust or add something new?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Some of my clients are short term, and so it might be one or two sessions, and other clients are more 10 or 12. And then I have a couple clients that are just sort of ongoing. So I'm kind of on retainer with them. And so I really love being on retainer and having a long-term relationship with the player because sometimes it takes a year to figure a player out. Like I think that most players are the puzzles themselves. Like they're trying to figure themselves out and trying to figure out how to get the best performance out of themselves. And that's one of the reasons why I'm in their life is to help them do that. But I can name multiple clients I've had where, you help right away and there's a dramatic improvement and then you sort of plateau for a while, but then they have another level in them. And I know that it's there and then they feel like they get stuck, but you just kind of have to stay in it long enough so that you can learn sort of the sort of what's underneath the surface with that player and then you can unlock them in profound ways. So if you just have enough time with an athlete, then you can usually unlock them.
Of course, of course. So I think I might have missed this, but what exactly is it that you do? I might have just jumped into this real quickly, and I didn't let our viewers in on this. But what exactly is it that you do? How would you describe your profession?
Yeah, so being a mental performance coach in the field of sports psych is what I do. So it's helping players mentally to perform at their very best. So sometimes they're not doing well and they're struggling. And so a team will bring me in, or a coach or an agent will bring me in to work with that athlete. And then other times, They just want sort of that ongoing slow drip relationship and coaching that I can provide. So mostly it's overcoming psychological barriers to performance, and it's also performance enhancing strategies to help them stay consistent with their performance. Because sometimes, if let's say you're a baseball player and you're playing 160 or 180 games, I can't remember what it is, but it's a lot of games. It's a lot of games. And to withstand the mental grind of having to perform at a high level on a regular basis. It's really hard to do because pitchers only pitch once every, 5 games. But a batter is doing this 3, 4 times a game. And let's say they're playing their fourth game in 5 days. So they will feel fatigue far quicker than a pitcher will. But that batter, if he's not sharp, he'll get blown away.
Exactly. And it's 162 games in the MLB. It could be 180 if they go to the World Series or something,
Mhm.
depending on that. And we do not have any game 163s anymore in the MLB. That's probably one thing I hate Rob Manfred for at
Hmm.
times. And I call him that just for jokes because I have my problems with him as commissioner. Um, just wanted a quick joke. So, mental fortitude. Um, Nate McKinnon is the second best hockey player right now. Um, Given that he's won a Stanley Cup, how would you compare his mental fortitude to Connor McDavid's?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I kind of don't know. In some ways, Nathan McKinnon sort of flies under the radar on a national level because he's sort of buried in the snow in Colorado, and Connor is just so otherworldly where he transcends the game. But they both to play at that level, you just have to be sort of different in a way, but your mental game has to be so on par. And I think you have to love winning so badly that you're willing to do things that other players aren't willing to do. And mind you, I think there are players with less skill or less talent that try just as hard and for good reason. I think they are overachievers in some ways, but to match your talent with your work ethic is pretty hard to do. And so those two guys, and there's more, but those two guys in particular are really special individuals that allow them to lock in every single game.
Absolutely. There was one player that I really thought was going to be written off. I thought the Panthers, he was going to be a liability for the Panthers at one point, given as he had the worst financial contract um, at the time, and that was Seth Jones. But he really did step up in the finals, and I was impressed too. I had no idea that he was going to be that good. I thought, okay, the Panthers can win this Stanley Cup, and I guess we'll trade Jones again. And he was coming from a very bad Blackhawks team, but he was probably just relieved to be in Sunrise at the time. Do you think just even sometimes with the trades is actually, can help players transform themselves and they actually become better in the long run if they're not on a good team or even in a good market?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think it speaks to the power of environment. So you can take a good player and put them, let's say, in a negative team environment, or even in terms of a system. Maybe it's just they're not aligned with that particular system or their role within that system, and they really struggle. But then you take them out of that system and you put them into a different system or different team environment, and they just thrive. And it's amazing. We see this in sports all the time. So when Seth joins Florida, and he's just, I think he struggled, and it might be that he struggled with expectations on the team because he was expected to be, sort of like a stalwart, and maybe he played maybe not even up to his own expectations. But he found himself in the playoffs, and good on him, and so maybe that switches or changes the momentum for him going into next season. But I think it does say a lot about environment and finding the right alignment and role for a particular player. And so we see a lot of movement at the free agent signing opening here in the NHL. And there's a lot of players going to new teams. And of course, I'm a Bruins fan, so I'm kind of watching what's going on with the Bruins. And apparently, there was a player, I can't remember his name. I think it was Simmons from the LA Kings that's going to join the Bruins. And everyone says that he plays like a Bruin. He's got a Bruins personality, kind of tough and gritty. And we'll see. We'll see if he makes that transition. He had a really great rookie year, and then with 20 plus goals, and then he hasn't even achieved close to that in the last couple of years with the Kings. So we're just going to kind of have to see if a change of environment makes a difference for him.
And and also going back to your role, um, if you're in the same role for like let's say 8 years, I mean it's going to get monotonous. You can get good at it, but sometimes you need to be put in a different role. When would you say that even a player or anyone in business needs to shake up that role and look or needs to look for a new role rather?
Yeah, I call this identity-based performance. So just being who you are and how you're naturally wired, that is going to be the thing that is going to be the most consistent for you. And we know that at the highest levels, athletes need to be consistent in order to be successful. And so you have to have the longevity. But if you're playing in a role or performing a role that's not really you, the team might want you to do that, but it's not really you, then it's not going to fit. I just think of, in some ways, I think of Trent Frederick, who went from Boston to the Oilers, who just signed a contract there. And in Boston, his role was to be a little bit of an enforcer, but for whatever reason, that just kind of it didn't align with who he was. And so I think going to a faster skating team like Edmonton, he might thrive there. He really struggled this past year with Boston, but he was fighting a really nagging high ankle sprain. And so I think he really struggled to put, points on the board for the Bruins, but I think he might have some more success at Edmonton just because it's a different environment and the role that he's going to be asked to play is going to be slightly different.
Absolutely. I'm good at making PowerPoints and just dominating, Microsoft Office. I don't need to do much, but the audiobooks that I've made, everything else, sometimes you do need to let the players experiment and actually learn to make mistakes too. And I've seen so many kids coming out of juniors just failing to adjust to the NHL. And I do think that they're told by some analytical guy that their 50 goals only translates to 9 NHL goals for the season. Now they don't necessarily play as many games as, the NHL, but still, that is disheartening to them when they have to operate in this strict lane of rules and everything. That's hard, and they need to be allowed to make mistakes because you see guys falling down even in the NHL. But they were really falling down in the AHL. I went to Charlotte to see the Checkers. I forgot who was playing, but they were falling down a lot there. They were falling down a lot, and these guys are making about what I'm making, like 60 grand. I guess that would be right, but once you, but if they're willing to bust their butts and even fall on the ice, then that should tell you a lot that you can work with them. But sometimes you have to give them that free range so that they succeed.
Yeah, and sometimes that's an experiment, right? Like finding their role on a pro team as opposed to being in a role on a junior team. Like for example, you get someone who is for their skill level, they do great in junior hockey or the American Hockey League, and they tend to be the top one or two scorers on their team. But when they come to the NHL, they're stuck on the fourth line because everybody skates in the NHL. Everybody can move. Everybody's good. And so they go from that scoring identity to more of a mucker, and it's a pretty big role transition. And some players can do it and other players can't. And, how to predict that, I don't know. That's what the draft is all about and scouting is all about. So, yeah, it's a very interesting question. Just because you're a scorer in junior doesn't mean you're going to be a scorer in the pro league, and vice versa. Just because you are, let's say, an enforcer or you're more physical in junior, maybe we just haven't tapped into the scoring side of you because the game's a lot faster. Maybe all of a sudden you start skating and you realize you're pretty good at it. And part of it you're skating for your life because everybody in the NHL can skate and everybody's fast and everybody's big. So you just kind of don't know. But again, that's what scouting is about.
Absolutely. Now, goalies, they have, I mean, the game's faster when they get to the NHL from juniors and AHL or CHL or QJHL.
Mhm.
Um, they, you know, there's not much difference except for speed, but they also need to be able to recognize, when to go to the top of the crease, everything of the sort. But even they can misplay things too, and they're just too focused on one side or anything else. Do you notice any have you ever noticed any tendencies with that when even, something as simple as blocking shots, can become complicated? Have you seen that in business?
Yeah, I mean, being a goalie at the NHL level is far more cerebral than it was in junior. So you have more pieces moving, you have more players, you have players that are faster. You have you're watching schemes, you're watching plays, you're watching plays form. To me, and because it's faster, it's just like your brain has to, your microprocessor in your brain just has to be moving faster. So yeah, it's just a different game in the NHL, and it's much more fat. It's much faster and it's much more cerebral.
Nice. Do you have any advice for dieting when it comes to athletes? Because sometimes, there's like, a nice cookie, a nice piece of cake that they want to have. But is there any guidance you would give them to lay down the pie or just put down the cake and actually have them focus on their dreams? Any advice along the
Yeah,
lines of that?
yeah, I mean it's really interesting. So one of the things that we talk about at the pro level is we call it the illusion of choice. And so if you want to be average, you have lots of choices. Think of a menu at the Cheesecake Factory. You have a lot of choices. If you want to be really good at what you do, you only have a few choices. If you want to be elite at what you do, you almost have no choice. There's a certain way you have to eat, and you have to eat it that way. And so when it comes to helping players with their nutrition, helping them understand that the goals and desires that they have has to match their nutrition. So if they have a goal of making it to the elite levels to the NHL, then they're going to have to eat elite. And that's just a whole different ballgame because most players don't. More players do than they used to. Like back in the 70s and 60s, I mean, guys were smoking. Like I heard stories about Guy Lafleur smoking in the locker room, like with a cigarette, right? So I think today the athletes are so good and they're so disciplined that I think you have to really eat elite in order to operate that way at the pro level.
I also think that you know, it's also becoming a bit more different. Gen Z does not drink. Now, I was born in 94. I'm not that part of that generation exactly. I think I missed the cutoff by a year, but but I don't drink either. I don't even see the purpose anymore. So that is an advantage that you see coming out of Gen Z. They don't drink. They they don't even go to nightclubs. I mean, nightclubs are actually on the decline, whether that's the economy or they just want to just hang out at home and save money and YouTube and chill, balling on a budget. That's what I've experienced. And I do think that you're seeing this translate a lot with, you know, guys like Bedard and Celebrini. Celebrini, um, was, Joe Thornton essentially watched over him for his rookie year, and then Celebrini went on his own. And I think Thornton, wanted to make sure that the San Jose Sharks succeeded too. Um, so when does an athlete step in and say, "Hey, I'm going to be your mentor for this," and for the benefit of the team, and puts aside his or her ego? So, so when, so what advice would you give to that athlete, um, as well? Because sometimes it can be intimidating, new guy coming in, he's the star, and you're just getting old, and you want to just, and you're about to quit too. And so when would you say that a player should step in and be that mentor?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, it's very difficult for someone, a player, or whether it's in sports or in business, to go up to somebody and say, "Well, let me mentor you." Most really good mentors don't do that. They want to be asked, or because it requires time, energy, and movement, right? So, um, I tend to think of Zdeno Chara as a Bruins fan, and I just think what kind of a quiet leader he was, but he was also a leader by example. And so he just sort of modeled the way, being a true professional at the NHL level. Or I think of Patrice Bergeron, again, not a vocal a guy, but just leading by example and saying something when he needed to, but just leading by example. And I think a lot of younger players, when they see that kind of skill and maturity being modeled, they want to be like that. So, yeah, I think if you want to be a mentor in the NHL level or at any level, whether it's sports or business, I think you just got to live it out. And people around you will notice and eventually ask you, "Hey, how did you do this?" Or "How did you do that?" Or "Hey, can I just hang out with you?" Or "Hey, can we go grab a coffee?" Or "Hey, can you show me how to do this particular move or drill?" I remember when Kobe Bryant would say to Michael Jordan, "Hey, can you show me this crossover move? Or can you show me this particular shot that you have?" And like, I got to get work on my footwork. And Michael was happy to show Kobe, what he was doing and some of his secrets. So yeah, I think Jordan wasn't going to go up to anybody and say, "Hey, can I mentor you?" It certainly was just living by example and doing your thing, and then watching, and then inviting other people to be a part of the skill training that you have.
And sometimes you just have to ask too. I mean, you're not, squeaky wheel will get the grease sort of scenario right
Hmm.
there. So, so for players that do struggle on the ice, what would you say to them? I mean, I'm doing personally, I'm doing okay in beer league. And it's just there, it's no checking. But there are players that do struggle and have, make a bad play, misread the play. What would you say to them too, as well, when
Well,
developing that mental fortitude?
yeah, there's a couple things. So number one is always rely or revert back to your strengths, because when you're playing outside of your skill zone, then it's really hard to succeed because you just don't have enough reps there. So it's kind of like, go back to what you do really well, because that's probably why you're playing the game, is because of what you do well. Players aren't in the NHL because of their weaknesses. They're in the NHL because of their strengths. So the first thing I would encourage someone to do is just kind of, revert back to what you're really good at and what your strength is. And number two, just have a really short memory, because if you dwell on a previous play while you're playing, you're probably not at your best in the present moment. And in order to succeed and to win in the present moment, your mind has to be syncopating with your body movement. And so it's just kind of like, be where your skates are, be where your feet are, be in the present moment, do as much as you can to think in neutral. So you're not thinking positively, you're not thinking negatively, you're not self-conscious about your thoughts, but that you are task conscious. So it's just kind of like, have a quick memory, right? And forget things very, very quickly. and then make sure that you're not allowing your emotions to get the better of you.
Of course. There's a scene in Ted Lasso where Ted Lasso, the coach, asks Sam, "Hey, what's the fish or what's the animal that has the worst memory on planet Earth?" And then Sam says, "A goldfish." And then Ted says, "Be a goldfish," sort of
Mhm.
thing. And you do need those, and you do need that mentality as well. There was, I'll tell you, there was this guy who just seemed to like really just fly by me in beer league, and I'm like I had him in the corner, and then he just you know puts the puck between my feet, and then he just flies down the ice, and then he scores, and then I'm like, man, like and you can get caught up in the moment too, but you move on, and we still got the win, and that's the important part.
Yeah, exactly. Just short memory.
Yeah, short memory. Of course. Oh, so how does one develop that mental fortitude? I mean, most people are not professional hockey players. Most people will never be a professional hockey player or a professional athlete at all. But how does your average Joe develop that mental fortitude?
Yeah, so mental fortitude or resilience or having grit, those things are outcomes. They're not really exercises that you can do. It's an outcome. Being resilient is an outcome of a bunch of different tools that or exercises that a player can practice. So it's like putting all of it together. Like, for example, your emotional regulation and your self-talk and your confidence. And when you put all three of those together, then you have some resilience. And so it's just more of like a bunch of tools in a tool bag that allow you to have that outcome of being resilient. So I think in the same way, the average person can learn those mental skills and it can have such a big difference in their life, but they sort of have to have someone to be able to coach them through those things so that they can access those tools when they need them the most.
Yeah, no one does this on their own. Um, as well. I do have a question. Have you ever worked with any golfers at all?
Golfing hasn't been one of the sports. I've played golf quite a bit, but I haven't ever coached someone in the sport of golf in on the mental side. There's a lot of guys who in the mental performance world, that's all they do is the mental performance side of golf, and I think that's fantastic. So they're the experts, and I would probably refer to someone like that if they were struggling with their golf game.
Of course, of course. Um, Samuel L. Jackson, I was watching him talk about golf one time, and he said, he said golf's the perfect game. It's like a perfect metaphor for life because sometimes there's wind. You need to adjust your swing. You need to hit the ball more to the right, not to the left, so that you have a better shot with your you have a better shot. And you can set up for a good putt. You also you also need to know how much to swing, what's the power behind it, how do you get it out of the bunker and everything. And you are competing with people that are coming in the golf match, I guess you'd call it. You're competing with them, and 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 even though you may be, a +2 on a hole, you still need to do what it takes to come back and win. And it can be very hard. I mean, golf is a very hard game in and of itself. And
Yeah, I think the most difficult sports when it comes to mental performance, I can think of two. Golf is not one of them. I think there are a lot of people that would argue with about that, but I think the two most difficult sports are figure skating and gymnastics. Because if you are not on in every single half second or quarter of a second or 2/10 of a second, your entire routine is done. And, golfers get multiple opportunities to succeed. And then when you add an element of danger when it comes to figure skating or gymnastics, it changes the game. So I think those, in my opinion, are the two most difficult sports to do mental performance, and there's a lot at stake.
Well, that is a good argument to make, but I'll always argue this that ice hockey is the hardest team sport in the world. It's the hardest team sport because, um, you
It's
know,
ballet on ice, man. It's
it,
it's incredible.
I mean, think about this. In lacrosse, you are on your feet. You are running around. You've essentially been running since you were 2 years old. Most people have been running since they were toddlers, at least. Whether they even know what running was at the time, I don't think so. I don't even think they knew what running was. But you're on your feet all day. You don't need any special shoe for baseball, basketball, football, lacrosse, even field hockey or soccer, anything. You are you are walking around in shoes for most of the day. You don't even necessarily run backwards in them most of the time. And and I will always say that hockey players are the ones that are the best skilled or will always have the best mental preparedness because they have developed an entirely different skill set before actually playing the game, which is to skate.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of breaks, like mental breaks in hockey. Like you do your shift, which is anywhere between 20 and 20 and 60 seconds per shift or 20 and 40 seconds. So I mean, your concentration level during that time is pretty incredible. You get to sit on the bench and you get to sort of think a little bit and catch your breath and sort of reset mentally and emotionally and psychologically. So that fair enough is one of the most difficult team sports there are. I think in figure skating and gymnastics, you just don't get that break. The, let's say you're doing a 60-second routine. Well, the 58th second is just as important as the first one. There's no difference in intensity. So yeah, definitely a difference, but hockey certainly is unique in that way.
And even though you may be coming off for the 58th second, you still need to have an intensity to return as you did coming out.
Hmm. Yeah, very well said.
There was one of my college coach who coached so many hockey players finally had one player get drafted by the Carolina Hurricanes, and I think that was very good too. I mean, Maryland is not a tradition, was almost never was a hockey state because we almost lost the Capitals too. But it just goes to show you that, when everything is going right, when you have prepared for so long, some things are just going to go right. I feel bad for not getting his name. If I could look this up, I'm gonna look this up right now and see if he's even around. But I do want to pose um, some closing thoughts to you. Um, so when it comes to starting a business, when it comes to being a pro athlete, when it comes to just even learning a new skill, what is the one thing that is going to separate those who fail from those who succeed?
Well, for me, it's one word, and that's resilience. Like everybody's going to fail. And I think the higher the mountain, the more times that you're going to fail. And so your ability to rebound and reframe failure will be the most important thing that you can possibly do. And as long as you can reframe failure in a way that's beneficial and productive for you, you will succeed.
And you know, it's like that Aerosmith song, you've got to lose to know how to win. Atlanta Hurricanes 2025, 2025 NHL draft picks. Let's see here. Um, hold on. Stan browser. Um, okay, let's see here. Man, internet though, but I mean it really is something special when okay, they traded 29th, 34th. Um, okay, let's see here. There was some Maryland. Okay, let's see. Los Angeles had no hesitation towards Russian forward. There was someone from who came out of Maryland too. Okay, it was okay, draft selections. I think it might have been Charlie Serrato, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Um, I might get him on the podcast because he was the only one who came from who came out of Penn State. Yeah, that's Charlie Serrano. That was who Coach Slusher coached back in the day, and I probably ran into him at one point back when I was at Towson too. So he played in Abington, Maryland, um, and that's Ice World, and it was, I mean, I guess looking back on it now, that arena was a bit dumpy too when I
Yeah, yeah. I think that idea of resilience, whether you're undrafted or you're a low draft pick, that idea of resilience is just crucial. And I think that's a great way to wrap up our time together is by talking about resilience in business and resilience in sports. No matter where you are in life, your ability to be resilient is the thing that will separate you.
and and even though Maryland was not a traditional hockey state, he still made it to Penn State and overall just to the NHL in general too. So he's going to at least play with one Sebastian Aho, hopefully soon. All right.
Yeah.
So that'll do it for this episode of the Adam Rothstein Hockey Podcast. 200 episodes. We made it.
All
Um,
right.
I don't know if,
Congratulations, by the way.
oh, and for 201, I'll probably have one of my friends on as well. So given the fact that this is the end of, since NHL is over, no hockey on television, probably have him on. Okay, so the best way to support this podcast is to check out the Hockey Journal. I have links in the show notes. That's on lulu.com. That should be the last link if you want to support this podcast. Also, check out the audiobook Growing Hockey that I've narrated myself personally. That is available on Spotify, so check that out. Check out the Substack, check out all the links, share it with your friends, rate this 5 stars, write me a little review, like this podcast, share it with all your friends, all that jazz. And with that being said, take care.